It was a Friday evening, and the warm smell of fresh bread and garlic butter filled the air inside Victor Rossi's restaurant. The soft music and the low sound of people talking created the perfect atmosphere for the kind of customers Victor loved: well-dressed, polite, and ready to spend. Every table was set with shining cutlery, folded napkins, and candles that flickered in their glass holders. Victor stood behind the counter, watching his staff move quickly but carefully. He liked everything to be perfect. The door opened with a small chime, and in walked a young couple. The man had short, messy hair and wore a faded jacket with jeans that looked old. He carried a small black backpack slung over one shoulder. The woman wore a simple dress that was neat but not fancy, and her shoes looked a little worn. They weren't dirty or rude-looking, but something about them made Victor frown. To him, they didn't fit the image of the kind of guests he thought his restaurant deserved on a busy night like this. He noticed them looking around, perhaps searching for a table. There were empty ones available, but in Victor's mind, seating them would be a mistake. He imagined them ordering only one cheap dish to share, or sitting too long without ordering much. He had worked too hard building his restaurant's reputation to risk it on people he assumed wouldn't spend enough. Without waiting for them to speak, Victor stepped forward. "Good evening," he said, his tone polite but cold. "I'm sorry, but we're full tonight." The man looked surprised. "Full? We have a reservation. It's under Carter." Victor already knew there were empty tables. In fact, 3 of them, but he ignored the man's words. "Yes, well, something came up. We're not able to seat you," he replied, glancing quickly toward a group of better-dressed guests who had just walked in behind them. The woman's eyes widened slightly. "But we booked this days ago," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't angry, just confused. She held her bag close to her side and took a small step back, as if she didn't want to cause trouble. Victor's patience thinned. He didn't want a scene. "I'm sorry, but we can't help you tonight," he said firmly. His voice carried enough volume that a few nearby diners turned their heads. The man looked at Victor for a long moment. His face didn't show anger, but there was something in his eyes, calm, steady, and a little sad. Then he gently took the woman's hand. "Let's go," he said softly. They turned and walked toward the door. The woman kept her gaze down, but the man glanced back one last time before leaving. That single look made Victor feel something he didn't understand. Not guilt, not exactly fear, but a strange discomfort. It was as if the man knew something Victor didn't. As the door closed behind them, Victor brushed the feeling away. He told himself he had done the right thing. His restaurant wasn't a place for just anyone. The better-dressed group he had been watching took the table that could have gone to the couple. They ordered wine and expensive dishes, just as Victor had predicted. He told himself this was proof he'd made the right call yet. Throughout the night, the image of the young couple kept coming back to his mind, the way the woman had looked. So embarrassed, the quiet strength in the man's eyes, and that final glance before they walked out. Something about it wouldn't leave him alone. He tried to focus on the busy evening, but no matter how many plates he carried or how many customers he greeted, he kept seeing that look in the man's eyes. He didn't know it yet, but that short moment at the door had set something in motion. Something that would change his life, his restaurant, and the way he saw people forever. The next morning. The sun had barely risen when Victor unlocked the doors to his restaurant. The quiet was comforting after the chaos of the night before. The smell of fresh coffee drifted from the kitchen, and the sound of the coffee machine clicking softly filled the air. He tried to focus on his routine, checking the reservations for the day, ordering supplies, and giving instructions to his staff, but his mind wasn't entirely on the work. Again and again, he saw the faces of the couple from last night. The woman's lowered eyes, the man's calm but piercing look, the way they had walked out without arguing, without shouting, without making a scene. That was unusual. Most people, when humiliated in public, would have reacted with anger, or at least frustration. They hadn't, and that strange quietness made Victor feel unsettled. He shook his head, muttering to himself, "It doesn't matter. I made the right choice. I protected the restaurant." Still, deep inside, a small voice whispered, "Did you though?" By mid-morning, the restaurant phone rang. Victor picked it up, expecting it to be a supplier or maybe a booking inquiry. "Rossi's Fine Dining." "This is Victor," he said. The voice on the other end was smooth and polite. "Good morning. I'm calling to confirm something about last night. Did you turn away a couple who had a reservation under the name Carter?" Victor's back straightened. "Yes, they came in dressed inappropriately for our setting. I had to maintain our standards." There was a pause. When the voice spoke again, the politeness was still there, but it had sharpened like a knife. "I see. So you didn't know who they were?" Victor frowned. "No. Should I?" The voice gave a short, almost pitying laugh. "You'll find out soon enough." And then the line went dead. Victor stood there with the phone still pressed to his ear. Find out soon enough. What was that supposed to mean? He replaced the receiver slowly, feeling a strange mixture of irritation and unease. He didn't like being spoken to in riddles. For the rest of the morning, the restaurant ran as usual. Customers came in for lunch, and Victor greeted them with his usual smile. But every time the door opened, a tiny part of him expected to see the couple again. He wasn't sure if he wanted them to come back so he could explain himself, or if he wanted to avoid them entirely. Then, just as the lunch rush was winding down, the sound of tires crunching on gravel made him look outside. A large, glossy black SUV had pulled up directly in front of the restaurant. It was spotless, the kind of car that made people turn their heads. The tinted windows hid whoever was inside. The driver's door opened first, and a tall man in a black suit stepped out. His movements were precise, controlled, the kind of posture that suggested training. Then the passenger door opened, and another suited man appeared. This one wearing dark sunglasses despite the overcast sky. Victor's stomach tightened. This was not the kind of visit he was used to. Finally, the back door of the SUV opened. Out stepped the young couple from last night. Victor froze. They looked different in the daylight, though their clothes were still casual. The man's jacket was neat now, his hair combed, and the woman's simple dress seemed to suit her perfectly. They walked with a quiet confidence that made Victor feel suddenly small. The man gave a polite nod to the suited guards before stepping toward the restaurant. The woman followed, her expression unreadable. They didn't look angry, but there was something in their calm, steady approach that felt heavier than anger. Victor's palms began to sweat. Strange thought flashed in his mind. What if I made a mistake I can't fix? As the door chime rang and they stepped inside, every staff member stopped what they were doing. Conversations between diners faded into silence. All eyes were on the couple, and Victor, for the first time in years, didn't know what to say. Victor stood frozen, his heart thumping louder than the soft background music in the restaurant. The young couple from last night was now just a few feet away. They looked calm, too calm, and that calmness was more intimidating than if they had been shouting at him. The man's eyes met Victor's, and for a moment, neither spoke. The silence felt heavy, stretching out until Victor cleared his throat. Good afternoon," he said, his voice not as steady as he wanted. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced around the restaurant as if he were quietly studying everything, the layout, the staff, the customers. The woman's gaze lingered on the corner table, where, last night, another group had taken the place meant for them. She didn't frown. She didn't smile. She just observed. Victor forced a smile. "If you're here to dine, I'm sure we can find a table today." His attempt at friendliness sounded stiff, even to his own ears. Finally, the man spoke. His voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight. "I'm not here to eat, Mr. Rossi." Victor blinked. "Then, why are you here?" The man took a slow step forward. "Do you know who I am?" Victor's mind scrambled. The question felt loaded, like the wrong answer could explode in his face. He shook his head. "I can't say I do." There was the faintest hint of a smile on the man's lips, but it wasn't a warm one. "Interesting," he said softly. Victor opened his mouth to ask more, but before he could, the restaurant phone rang from behind the counter. One of the waiters, a nervous young man named Marco, picked it up. His eyes went wide, and he looked quickly at Victor. "It's for you, Marco, Stammered. Victor walked over, feeling the couple's eyes on him the whole time. He took the phone. Yes. The voice on the other end was deep, controlled. "Mr. Rossi, I understand you have 2 guests standing in your restaurant. You turned them away last night." Victor's grip on the phone tightened. "There. Here now. I suggest," the voice continued, "that you treat them with more respect this time. They are important." The line went dead before Victor could ask anything else. He slowly put the phone down. Important? The word rolled in his mind like a storm cloud. Important? How? When he turned back toward the couple, they were standing closer now, just a few steps away. The suited men who had driven them were still outside, watching through the glass. The customers inside the restaurant had stopped pretending not to stare. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Victor took a breath. "Look, if this—" "It was about last night," the woman interrupted, her voice quiet but sharp. "It is." Victor felt his throat tighten. "You judged us before you even heard us speak," she said, her eyes locked on his. "You looked at our clothes, our faces, and decided we weren't good enough for your tables." Victor opened his mouth to defend himself, but she didn't give him the chance. "You think you know who people are by how they look, but you don't." The man stepped forward now. His voice was steady, but each word felt deliberate, like he was placing heavy stones in a row. "You don't know us, Mr. Rossi, but you will." Victor swallowed hard. There was no shouting, no threats, yet the way they stood there, completely in control, made him feel like the smallest man in the room. He could sense that whatever they were about to reveal would change everything, and maybe not in a way he could fix. The woman exchanged a glance with the man, and then they both turned toward the door. "We'll be in touch," the man said. Over his shoulder, the door closed softly behind them, leaving a silence so deep that Victor could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. His staff didn't move. Neither did his customers. And deep inside, Victor knew the real storm hadn't even begun yet. The afternoon passed slowly, but Victor couldn't focus on anything. Even as he gave orders to his staff and pretended to check invoices, his mind kept replaying the morning's encounter. The couple's calm voices, their confident stares, and the man's final words, "You will know us," echoed in his head like a warning. By early evening, the restaurant was getting busy again. Soft golden lights spilled across the polished tables, and the chatter of customers filled the air. Everything looked normal on the outside, but inside, Victor felt like something was about to happen. He kept glancing toward the door, even though he told himself not to dot. Then it happened. Outside, the sound of a deep engine rumble broke through the noise of the street. Heads turned toward the windows as a large black SUV rolled to a slow stop right in front of the restaurant. This one was different from the cars that normally parked there. It was longer, sleeker, and had an authority about it. The glossy paint reflected the city lights, and its tinted windows made it impossible to see inside. The SUV's door opened, and out stepped a man in a perfectly tailored suit. His shoulders were broad, and his movements were controlled, like someone who had spent years in environments where every gesture mattered. He scanned the street before his eyes locked on the restaurant. A second suited man emerged from the passenger side, wearing dark sunglasses despite the fading daylight. He didn't look around. He simply stood near the door of the SUV, still and watchful, as though guarding something or someone. And then the back door opened. The couple from last night stepped out, but this time it weren't just two ordinary people in casual clothes. The man wore a crisp, dark shirt with the sleeves neatly rolled just enough to show a silver watch that caught the light. The woman was in a simple but elegant dress, the kind that didn't need sparkle to draw attention. Her hair, tied back neatly, gave her an air of quiet authority. They didn't rush, they didn't hesitate. They simply walked toward the restaurant as if they owned the ground beneath their feet. The suited men followed behind, not too close, not too far, just enough to make their presence felt. Inside, conversations began to die down. Forks paused mid-air. Glasses were lowered to tables. People sensed something important was happening, even if they didn't know what. Victor felt his heartbeat in his ears. He wiped his palms on his apron without thinking. Why are they here? He thought. And why like this? The door chimed as they entered. The couple didn't look left or right. Their eyes were on Victor. Every step they took toward him seemed to make the room smaller. "Good evening, Mr. Rossi," the man said, his tone calm but carrying a weight that made even the air seem heavier. Victor forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good evening, I wasn't expecting you." The woman's gaze didn't leave his. "We know." For a moment, no one else in the room moved. Even Victor's staff stood frozen, their eyes darting between their boss and the mysterious couple. The man glanced around the restaurant, nodding slightly. "Nice place. You've worked hard for it, haven't you?" "Yes," Victor said slowly. Unsure where the conversation was heading, the man's smile was faint, but it wasn't friendly. It would be a shame to lose it over a misunderstanding. Victor's throat tightened. I'm not sure I follow." The woman stepped forward, her voice quiet but cutting through the room like glass. "You judged us in less than a minute, Mr. Rossi. You decided what we were worth without even knowing our names. Last night, you made a choice. Tonight, we'll show you why it was the wrong one." Victor's stomach sank. The suited men moved slightly, just enough to remind him that this wasn't a casual visit. The other diners leaned in, pretending not to stare but unable to look away. For the first time in years, Victor felt like the control he always had inside his restaurant was slipping through his fingers. And as the couple took the last few steps toward him, he had no idea whether they were here to destroy him or to change his life forever. Victor stood rooted to the spot, his breath shallow. The couple was now only a few feet away, and the quiet inside the restaurant was so thick that even the soft hum of the refrigerators in the kitchen seemed loud. Every customer's eyes followed them. Every waiter held their tray a little tighter. Something big was about to happen, and everyone could feel it. The man looked at Victor for a long moment before finally speaking. "My name," he said in a low, steady voice, "is Daniel Carter." The name meant nothing to Victor at first, at least not until Daniel added, "CEO of Carter International Hospitality Group." Victor's brow furrowed. The name sounded familiar, but his mind scrambled to place it. Carter International. He'd heard it before in trade magazines, in industry news. They owned high-end restaurants and luxury hotels in major cities across the world. They were the kind of company that could make or break someone in the food business with a single phone call. Daniel continued, his voice never rising, but every word landing like a stone. "We came here last night because we'd heard about Rossi's fine dining. We wanted to see for ourselves what made it so special." Victor's mouth went dry. He had turned away a CEO who could buy his entire restaurant 10 times over. Daniel glanced at the woman beside him. "This is my wife, Emily Carter. She's the founder of the Carter Foundation. We help small, independent restaurants grow." When we see potential, Emily finally spoke, her voice soft but edged with meaning. "We were in this city for only 2 nights. We had planned to eat here, speak with you, and maybe even offer you something we don't give lightly, partnership. But instead," she let the sentence hang in the air, unfinished. Like a blade suspended above his head, Victor opened his mouth, but no words came out. All he could think about was the moment he'd turn them away, his own voice telling them, "We're full." Tonight, he remembered the empty tables, the way he hadn't even checked their reservation, and the look Daniel had given him before leaving. Daniel's gaze stayed fixed on Victor. "Last night, you saw 2 people who didn't look like they belonged in your perfect little world, and you decided they weren't worth your time. You didn't ask our names. You didn't even listen." The truth of those words hit Victor like a punch. He wanted to defend himself, to say he'd been protecting the image of his restaurant, but the excuses sounded weak, even in his own head. Emily's eyes softened just a fraction, but her voice stayed steady. "Do you know why we dress like this sometimes?" She gestured to her simple attire. "Because money and status hide the way people really see you. We want to know if we'll be treated with the same respect as anyone else. Last night, you gave us our answer." Victor swallowed hard, his pride crumbling under the weight of their words. I didn't mean to offend you," he managed to say. "It was a mistake." Daniel tilted his head slightly, studying him. A mistake can be forgiven, but arrogance, that's harder. For a long moment, no one spoke. The room felt frozen in time. Victor's staff shifted uncomfortably. The customers sat in silence, their eyes darting between the 3 of them as if they were watching the climax of a movie. Then Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Victor could hear. "The question is, Mr. Rossi, what are you going to do with the second chance you're about to be given?" Victor's eyes widened slightly. Second chance. Daniel straightened, a faint, unreadable smile on his lips. "We'll discuss it, not here, not now, but soon." Emily gave Victor one last look, not cruel, not angry, but heavy with meaning. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Daniel followed, the suited men falling into step behind them, as the black SUV pulled away from the curb. Victor stood in the middle of his restaurant, still trying to process what had just happened. His heart was pounding, his thoughts a tangled mess. A CEO, a philanthropist, a chance that could change everything, if they were truly willing to give it. But one thought rose above all the others. Clear and cold, they could just as easily destroy him. Asterisk, asterisk, the night after Daniel and Emily left, Victor barely slept. He lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, his mind chasing one question over and over. What did he mean by a second chance? Every detail of the last 2 days replayed in his head the moment he'd turned them away. Their calm but piercing stares, the quiet authority in Daniel's voice, Emily's words about respect. He had been in the restaurant business for 20 years, and in that time, he'd faced angry customers, bad reviews, even the threat of closing during hard times. But this felt different. This felt personal. By morning, he was restless. He arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual, walking the empty dining room with his hands in his pockets. The air felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something. His staff noticed his unease, but didn't dare ask. It wasn't until just after lunch service that it happened. The door opened without the usual chime, almost as if it knew to stay silent, and there they were. Daniel and Emily Carter. No bodyguards this time. Just the 2 of them, dressed casually again. "Mr. Rossi," Daniel said, nodding slightly. Victor's instinct was to straighten his posture and hide his nerves. "Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter, please, have a seat." They chose a table near the window, the same one Victor had refused them on that first night. He sat opposite them, his hands folded on the table to stop them from fidgeting. Daniel didn't waste time. "I told you we'd talk, and now we will." He leaned back slightly, his gaze steady. "I have no interest in destroying your business, Mr. Rossi, but I do have an interest in seeing what kind of man you are when you're given a choice." Victor listened, unsure where this was going. Emily spoke next, her tone calm but precise. "We came here originally because we'd heard you had talent, that your food wasn't just good, it was memorable. We were looking for a place to invest, somewhere to expand under our brand. But money isn't everything in our world. How you treat people matters more." Victor nodded slowly, his pride burning under their gaze. "I understand. I made a mistake." Daniel raised a hand slightly. "Words are easy, Mr. Rossi. Change is harder." He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "So here's my condition. If you want our partnership, if you want access to our resources, our connections, and the kind of publicity that can put your name on the map, you will agree to one rule, a rule that you will never break." Victor swallowed. "What rule?" Daniel's voice dropped lower, but it carried a weight that made every word sink deep. "You will treat every person who walks through your door with equal respect. Whether they come in wearing a three-piece suit or a torn jacket, whether they're here for a glass of water or a 7-course meal, they are your guests. You will not judge them by what they wear, how they look, or what you think they can spend." Victor's throat tightened. Emily leaned in, her eyes unwavering. "And we will be watching. Not just once, but whenever we choose. Sometimes we'll visit dressed like this, sometimes in formal clothes. And sometimes we won't tell you at all. If we see even one moment where you break that rule, our offer disappears. No second chances after that." The words hung between them like a contract, written in invisible ink. Victor hesitated. His pride wanted to argue, to say that he already treated people well, that the incident with them was a rare exception. But deep down, he knew it wasn't true. He had made snap judgments before, maybe not as openly as that night, but they were there. He drew in a slow breath. "I accept." Daniel studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "Good. Then we'll see if you mean it." Emily stood, smoothing her dress. "We'll be in touch with the formal details. But, remember, Mr. Rossi, we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for sincerity. Show us that, and you'll have more than you ever imagined." They left without shaking his hand, without another word. Victor sat at the table long after they were gone, the weight of their condition pressing down on him. It wasn't just about keeping a business anymore. It was about proving he could be better than the man he'd been that night. And as he looked around his restaurant, he realized this test might be the hardest thing he'd ever agreed to. The first few days after Victor agreed to Daniel and Emily's condition felt strange. Every time the restaurant door opened, he found himself wondering, is this the moment they're testing me? He had instructed his staff about the new rule. Treat everyone the same, no matter how they looked. Some nodded and agreed easily. Others looked uncertain, clearly remembering the way he had run things before. For years, he had been selective about who got a table during busy nights, often turning away customers who didn't fit the image. Now, that habit had to die. The real test came sooner than he expected. It was a rainy Thursday evening. The restaurant was nearly full, the warm lights reflecting off wet sidewalks outside. Victor was greeting a couple in fine suits when the door opened again. This time, a man walked in wearing an oversized raincoat, faded jeans, and shoes that looked like they had seen better days. His hair was damp from the rain, and in his hand he held a small, crumpled envelope in the past. Victor wouldn't have even let him pass the entrance. He would have politely or not so politely told him they were full. And tonight, with so many well-dressed diners enjoying their meals, the old reflex almost rose in him again. Almost, he forced himself to stop and remembered Daniel's voice. Treat every person who walks through your door with equal respect. Good evening, Victor said, his voice steady but warm this time. Table for one. The man nodded. Yes, please. I don't have a reservation. That's all right, Victor replied, offering a genuine smile. We'll find you a seat. He guided the man to a small table near the window, pulling out the chair for him, something Victor had rarely done for guests who didn't look like big spenders. One of the waiters, Marco, looked at him curiously but didn't question it. The man ordered the house special pasta and a glass of water. Nothing fancy. He ate quietly, glancing around the restaurant as though he didn't often dine in places like this. When he finished his meal, he reached for the envelope, opened it, and carefully counted a few bills to cover the food. But then, to Victor's surprise, he took out a neatly folded piece of paper and slid it across the table. This is for you, he said softly. Victor unfolded it. Inside was a short letter written in careful handwriting. I work for a small culinary magazine. I visit places quietly, without making myself known. Your food was excellent, but what I noticed most tonight was how you treated me. People like me aren't always welcome in places like this. You made me feel at home. That's worth writing. About at the bottom was the man's name and the magazine he represented, a respected publication in the food industry. Victor felt a strange mix of pride and relief, not just because of the good press that might come from it, but because he knew, without a doubt, that this time he had passed the test. Still, a question lingered in his mind. Was this one of Daniel and Emily's people? Was this part of the watch they'd promised? He didn't know. But as the man left, Victor realized it didn't matter. This was the kind of owner he wanted to be now, not because someone was watching, but because it was right. Yet somewhere deep inside, he sensed the Carters weren't finished with him. They would return, and when they did, it would be for the final decision. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. It had been 3 weeks since Victor last saw Daniel and Emily Carter. In that time, he had changed more than he thought possible. He didn't just follow their rule, he lived by it. The restaurant felt different now. Every guest who walked in, no matter what they wore, was greeted with the same warm smile. There were no quick judgments, no dismissive glances, no subtle hints for people to leave. And something surprising happened. Business improved. Word spread quietly at first that Rossi's fine dining wasn't just known for its food anymore. It was known for its heart. People of all walks of life came through the door, and the atmosphere was warmer, richer, more alive. Still, Victor couldn't shake the feeling that the Carters would return at any moment. He didn't know when, but he knew they wouldn't simply vanish from his life. And then, one Friday evening, the same day of the week, this all began. It happened. The door opened, and in walked Daniel and Emily. This time, they were dressed casually again. Jeans, simple shirts, nothing flashy. They didn't bring bodyguards. They didn't need to. Their presence alone drew quiet attention from the diners. Victor felt his heart jump. Instead of the old nervousness, he felt something else, readiness. He walked straight over to them. Double quotes, Mr. Carter. Mrs. Carter, he said warmly. Welcome back. Your table is ready. Emily smiled faintly. No hesitation this time. Not for anyone, Victor replied, meaning every word. They sat at the same table by the window. Victor personally took their order, ensuring every detail was perfect without being overbearing. He treated them exactly as he would any guest, attentive, respectful, but never pretending. When their meal was over, Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying Victor for a moment before speaking. "We've been watching," he said simply. Victor froze. "You have?" Daniel nodded. "Not just us. Friends, colleagues, even strangers. We wanted to see if you'd keep your word when you thought no one was looking." Emily's voice was gentle but firm. It didn't just pass the test. "Mr. Rossi, you changed your restaurant's soul." Victor felt a weight lift off his shoulders, replaced by a warm pride he hadn't felt in years. Daniel reached into his jacket and placed a folder on the table. "This is our partnership agreement. We'll be adding Rosie's Fine Dining too. The Carter Hospitality Group, you'll get resources, training for your staff, marketing, and a chance to open more locations under your name. But more importantly," he paused, a hint of a smile in his eyes, "you'll keep running it the way you have these last few weeks." Victor picked up the folder, his hands trembling slightly. "I don't know what to say." Emily leaned forward. "Then say this: the next time someone walks through your door, you'll see a person, not a price tag." He nodded. "You have my word." The three of them stood, and for the first time, Daniel extended his hand. Victor shook it firmly, feeling the final seal of trust between them. As they walked toward the door, Daniel glanced back. "Oh, and Mr. Rossi, we dressed casually on purpose tonight too. Old habits die hard. You passed without a second thought." Victor smiled, a real smile that came from deep inside. "I stopped seeing clothes a long time ago." The door closed behind them, and the restaurant hummed with quiet admiration. The staff exchanged looks of pride, and Victor returned to his work, his steps lighter than they'd been in years. That night, as the last customers left and the lights dimmed, he stood alone in the dining room. He thought about how one mistake could have cost him everything, and how a second chance, given by two people he had once misjudged, had changed not only his business, but the man he was. And from that night on, Rossi's Fine Dining would be known not just for what was on the plate, but for the way it welcomed every soul who walked through its doors. Months had passed since the Carters had signed the partnership agreement with Victor. Rossi's Fine Dining was no longer just a local favorite. It was a name people in other cities now recognized. Food bloggers, critics, and even celebrities had begun visiting, curious about the restaurant that was making so much quiet noise in the industry. But success wasn't the biggest change. The real transformation was in the way the restaurant felt. The atmosphere had shifted entirely. The staff no longer glanced at customers and made silent judgments about their appearance. There was laughter in the air, warm greetings at the door, and conversations between tables that once would have stayed silent. Victor had noticed that when people felt truly welcome, they carried themselves differently. Even the simplest meal seemed special when served without prejudice. One chilly winter evening, something happened that reminded Victor why all this mattered. The restaurant was full when the door opened, letting in a gust of cold wind. A young woman stepped inside, shivering, her coat thin and worn. She looked hesitant, almost ready to turn around and leave. Victor spotted her immediately. He walked over, smiling warmly. "Good evening. Welcome to Rossi's. Table for one." She nodded shyly. I don't have a reservation." "That's all right," Victor said without hesitation. "Come in. Let's get you warm." He guided her to a corner table near the fireplace, brought her a blanket, asked the kitchen to prepare something hearty on the house. At first, she looked surprised, even suspicious, but then her shoulders relaxed. She thanked him quietly and began to eat. Halfway through her meal, she pulled out a small notebook and began writing. When she finished eating, she stood up and handed Victor a folded piece of paper before leaving. Curious, he opened it. Inside was a short note. "I came in tonight because I was hungry and cold. I was ready to be told I didn't belong here. Instead, you treated me with kindness. People remember moments like this forever. Thank you." Victor stood there for a long moment, the letter in his hands, a deep warmth spreading in his chest. He thought about the man he had been before, the man who had once turned away Daniel and Emily Carter without a second thought. That man was gone. Later that night, as he locked the doors, Victor looked around the empty dining room and smiled. The Carters had given him a second chance, but it was the guests, every single one of them, who gave him the purpose to keep earning it, and somewhere out there. He knew Daniel and Emily were smiling too, because the greatest success wasn't the expanded business, the reviews, or the money. It was the quiet truth that now lived inside Rosie's fine dining. Every person who walked through those doors was welcome, always.